A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
We have been watching the skies over the Middle East for weeks now, but the shift we have seen in the last few days is something else entirely. It feels like we have crossed a tactical Rubicon where the old rules of engagement have just evaporated. Today's prompt from Daniel is about the ongoing Israel-Iran ballistic missile exchanges, specifically asking what lessons planners are drawing and what has been the most surprising part of the conflict so far. It is a heavy topic, but given the sheer volume of metal flying through the air lately, it is one we really need to pass. This is not just a border skirmish or a proxy fight anymore. We are witnessing the first sustained, high-volume ballistic saturation campaign in human history.
It is the defining military event of the mid-20s, Corn. Herman Poppleberry here, and I have been buried in the telemetry data and the open-source intelligence reports from the March 12th saturation event all morning. What we are looking at is not just a bigger version of what happened in 2024. We are seeing a complete doctrinal shift. The era of the singular symbolic strike is over. We have entered the age of high-cadence, mass attrition, ballistic warfare. The March 12th exchange represents a permanent change in the calculus of regional deterrence because it proved that you can, in fact, overwhelm a world-class integrated air defense system if you are willing to spend enough airframes to do it.
That word cadence is the one that keeps sticking in my mind. In previous years, these exchanges felt like punctuated sentences. There was a launch, a tense hour of waiting, the interceptions, and then a week of diplomatic posturing. Now, the sentences have turned into a run-on paragraph that does not seem to have a period in sight. We are talking about a transition from precision strike doctrine, where every missile has a specific high-value target, to mass attrition warfare, where the goal is simply to exhaust the defender's magazine.
The numbers back that up. If you look at the launch data from the last 2 weeks, we have seen a 40% increase in missile launch cadence compared to the 2024 conflicts. We are not talking about dozens of missiles. We are talking about hundreds of ballistic units being cycled through launchers in a continuous loop. The Iranians have moved almost 75% of their active inventory to solid fuel systems, which is a detail we touched on way back in episode 918 when we were looking at their strategic depth. In 2024, they were still relying heavily on liquid-fueled variants like the Shahab 3, which required a massive logistical footprint and hours of preparation. Now, they are rolling out the Fatah 1 and the Rezvan series. These are fire and forget on a strategic scale.
And that solid fuel shift is the technical why behind the cadence, right? You do not have to spend hours fueling a rocket on the pad while a drone watches you from 30,000 feet. You just roll it out, point it, and fire. It fundamentally breaks the traditional cost-exchange ratio of defense because the attacker can launch faster than the defender can reload or even manufacture new interceptors.
That is the core of the problem for the Israeli Air Force and the integrated air and missile defense planners. In the past, you could target the fueling process. You could use preemptive strikes to take out the archers before they shot the arrows. Now, the cycle time from canister open to ignition is so short that the window for preemptive strikes has basically slammed shut. But the real lesson being learned right now, and I think this answers the first part of Daniel's prompt, is that the signaling model of warfare has failed.
When you say signaling model, you mean the idea that I will hit you just hard enough to show I could hit you harder, so please stop, like a diplomatic warning shot.
It is the fundamental assumption that missiles are a tool of communication. Planners thought that by launching a controlled number of projectiles, they were setting terms for a negotiation. But what we saw on March 12th was not a message. It was an attempt at saturation. When you fire over 150 ballistic missiles in a single 20-minute window, you are not trying to talk. You are trying to break the math of the interceptors. You are trying to find the saturation point, where the computer system simply cannot assign an interceptor to every incoming track.
This brings us to that concept of information attrition we discussed in episode 1193. If I'm the defender, I have a finite number of radars and a finite number of interceptor missiles, like the Arrow 3 or the David Sling. If you send more targets than I have missiles, or more targets than my computer can track at once, the system fails even if the technology is perfect. It is about the noise of the barrage masking the actual intent of the strike.
The math is brutal, and it is the most significant lesson for planners. An Arrow 3 interceptor costs roughly $3 million. An Iranian Fata 1 or a late model Resvon might cost a fraction of that, maybe $300,000. When the cadence is this high, you are not just fighting a war of explosives, you are fighting a war of balance sheets. The defense is being forced to make high-speed triage decisions. The algorithms have to decide in milliseconds, is this incoming missile headed for an empty field in the Negev, or is it headed for the Kiryat in Tel Aviv? If the system miscalculates because it is overwhelmed by the noise of 100 other decoys or low-value projectiles, something gets through.
That leads into what I find most surprising about the conflict so far. I expected the defense to be good, but I did not expect the sheer psychological weight of the lethality per missile ratio to change so much. We're seeing these maneuverable reentry vehicles, or MARVs, that do not just follow a predictable parabola. They are dancing in the terminal phase. This is not the SC-wide warfare of the 90s.
Those MARVs are the technical nightmare of 2026. In 2024, most of what was fired was following a ballistic arc. If you know the starting point and the velocity, you can predict the impact point with high school physics. But the latest iterations of the Iranian missiles are using terminal guidance to pull high G maneuvers as they re-enter the atmosphere. It turns a predictable target into a probabilistic cloud. The lethality per missile goes up because even if you have a 90% interception rate, the 10% that get through are specifically steered toward high-value nodes. They are not just falling, they are hunting.
It is like trying to catch a fly with chopsticks, while someone is throwing a bucket of golf balls at your head. And the surprising part is how the Israeli systems have had to pivot from intercept everything to defend the nodes. If you listen to the briefings coming out of the Ministry of Defense, they are being very quiet about the fact that some missiles are being allowed to land, not because they cannot hit them, but because the algorithm has determined that the cost of the interceptor is higher than the value of the dirt the missile is going to hit.
That is a massive shift in policy. For years, the promise to the Israeli public was a hermetic seal. The Iron Dome and the Arrow were marketed as a perfect shield. Admitting that you are letting missiles land because of economic optimization is a hard pill for a population to swallow when they are sitting in bomb shelters. But it is the only sustainable way to fight a protracted conflict. If you use your last Arrow interceptor to stop a missile headed for a parking lot, you have nothing left when the next wave comes for the power plant. This is the strategic depth problem we have talked about. Geography used to be your buffer. If you were far away, you had time to react. But with solid fuel missiles and high-speed trajectories, the entire region has effectively shrunk. There is no rear anymore. Everything is the front line.
I want to go back to the March 12th event because I think there is a technical detail there that people missed. It was not just the number of missiles, it was the synchronization. They were not launched from one spot. They were launched from across 1,000-mile arc sites in Tabriz, Kermanshah, and mobile launchers in the Yaz Desert, all timed to arrive over their targets at the exact same second.
That requires a level of command and control that we did not see from the Revolutionary Guard 2 years ago. They are using network sensor fusion on their end to coordinate these salvos. It is algorithmic combat. We saw the precursors to this in the 12-Day War, which we covered in episode 692. But this is that logic taken to its extreme. They are treating the sky like a data bus. They want to flood the bus so the defense's processor hangs. This is why the defense system struggled with the specific cadence of these recent launches. It was not just the volume, it was the temporal density.
And the defense has had to respond with its own AI-driven sensor fusion. I was reading a report about the shimmering curtain effect over Tel Aviv, that cloud of cluster munitions and pyrotechnic sparks that we mentioned in episode 973. That is not just a visual, it is a diagnostic tool. The defense is trying to create noise for the incoming missile's infrared sensors to hide the real targets. It is a countermeasure against those MARVs we were talking about.
It is a game of electronic hide-and-seek played at Mach 5. But here is the lesson that planners are really grappling with. You cannot build enough interceptors to win this way forever. The production capacity for a solid-fuel missile is simply higher than the production capacity for a complex, multi-stage interceptor like the Arrow 3. We are seeing a shift in thinking toward distributed defense. Instead of one big radar and a battery of missiles, you want thousands of small sensors and mobile launchers that are harder to target. You move away from the sitting duck, batteries, and toward something more fluid.
So, move toward a more resilient network rather than a single point of failure.
The goal is to make the enemy's targeting problem as difficult as your interception problem. If they do not know where your radars are because you have shifted to passive sensing or distributed arrays, they cannot suppress your air defenses. This is the second-order effect of the conflict, the realization that geographic size is no longer a buffer, so you have to create digital depth through sensor fusion and distributed nodes.
Does this mean the era of the big shield is over? Are we moving toward a future where we just accept that some percentage of these things will always get through, and we just build better bunkers?
I think that is the grim reality planners are facing. The lesson is that perfect defense is a myth in the age of saturation. You have to focus on resilience and redundancy. Can your power grid survive a hit? Can your communication networks reroute instantly? We are seeing the Israelis move their critical servers into deep underground facilities, not just for the data, but for the people running them. It is about rapid recovery infrastructure. If you can fix the damage faster than the enemy can afford to send the next wave, you have a different kind of deterrence.
That is a very different kind of deterrence than I will shoot down every missile you fire. It is more like, go ahead and hit me. I will be back up and running in an hour, and you just wasted $50 million. It shifts the burden of cost back onto the attacker.
It is a war of endurance. And what is surprising, and maybe a bit terrifying, is how quickly the automation has taken over. We are at a point where the human is on the loop rather than in the loop. The speeds are too high for a kernel to be making the fire or don't fire call for every single interceptor. The software is running the war. We are seeing the performance of the smaller, cheaper interceptors like the updated Iron Dome being used as a cleanup crew for the stuff that the long-range systems miss or ignore. It is a masterclass in layered defense, but it is a machine-led masterclass.
Which brings up the question of what happens when the software makes a mistake. If the algorithm decides a missile is headed for an empty field, but it is actually headed for a hospital, the political fallout is catastrophic. But if the human intervenes and slows down the process, the whole system gets overwhelmed. It is a catch-22.
It is the ultimate pressure test for algorithmic warfare. We have moved from the 101 level of missile defense into the PhD level, and the exam is happening in real time over the heads of millions of people. One of the most surprising things to me, technically speaking, has been the coordination between those layers. In episode 929, we talked about decoding Iranian targeting, and we saw how they were trying to find the seams between the layers. What we are seeing now is the Israeli response, closing those seams with better data sharing between the United States Navy ships in the Mediterranean, the Israeli batteries, and even regional partners. It is a massive ad hoc sensor network that spans the entire Levant.
But that network is also a target. If you can knock out one of those nodes, or jam the link between a United States destroyer and an Israeli battery, the whole shimmering curtain starts to tear. We are already seeing an increase in electronic warfare. It is not just about the kinetic hit. It is about the cyberkinetic overlap.
That is the next phase of this conflict, corn. If I can spoof your radar into seeing 10 missiles instead of 1, I have achieved saturation without firing a single extra rocket. Which is why the information attrition idea is so powerful. It is about the cost of processing truth in an environment full of high-speed lies. The truth is the one missile with the high explosive warhead, and the lies are the 99 decoys or spoofed radar returns. The defender has to find the truth every single time. The attacker only has to hide it once.
So, if we are looking at takeaways for the policy planners, the first one has to be that the cost-exchange ratio is currently tilted heavily in favor of the attacker. You cannot buy your way out of this with more interceptors alone. You need a mix of active defense, the interceptors, and passive defense, which is the bunkers and the redundancy.
That is number one. But more importantly, you need offensive defense. You have to be able to hit the launchers the moment they reveal themselves. This leads to the second lesson, the absolute necessity of AI-driven target prioritization. Humans cannot manage the triage of 100 missile salvo. You have to trust the machine to decide what is worth saving. That is a massive ethical and strategic leap that most countries are not ready for.
And the third lesson is that strategic depth is now a function of technology, not geography. Being 2,000 miles away does not matter if the missile can get there in 15 minutes and you have no way to stop it. Every nation is now effectively a frontline state in the age of global ballistic reach. It makes the world feel much smaller and much more dangerous.
It is total defense. And the most surprising thing is that, despite the intensity of the March 12th event, the social fabric has held. The rapid recovery model is actually working to some extent. People are getting used to the new normal of high-cadence warfare, which is both impressive and deeply unsettling. It is the normalization of the extreme. We saw it in the 12-Day War, and we are seeing it again now, but on a much larger scale. The weird part of this prompt is how quickly the unthinkable becomes the routine.
I think we have covered the core of Daniel's question here. The shift from signaling to saturation is the big story, and the surprising part is how the economic and algorithmic reality of the defense has had to abandon the idea of a perfect shield. It is a sobering look at the future of conflict. We are seeing the birth of a new kind of warfare, one that is faster, cheaper for the attacker, and much more cognitively demanding for the defender.
It is a war of endurance. We will be keeping a close eye on the telemetry as this continues. There is a looming question of whether the next phase will be fully autonomous counter-battery fire, where the system doesn't just intercept the missile, but automatically strikes the launch site within seconds. That would be another massive escalation, and it would remove the human from the loop entirely.
Well, if you want to dive deeper into the history of how we got here, I really recommend checking out episode 1193 on information attrition, or episode 692 on the 12-Day War. They provide a lot of the context for the why behind the what we are seeing today.
And if you are interested in the Iranian side of the engineering, episode 918 is still the best breakdown of their solid fuel transition. It is wild to see those projections from a couple of years ago becoming the daily reality now.
It really is. On that note, I think we will wrap this one up. Thanks for the deep dive, Herman. I know you have been itching to get those telemetry stats out into the world.
It is what I do, Corn. It is what I do.
Thanks as always to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping the gears turning behind the scenes. And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power the research and generation of this show. We literally couldn't do these deep dives without that compute.
This has been My Weird Prompts. If you are enjoying our explorations of the strange and technical, search for My Weird Prompts on Telegram to get notified the second a new episode drops. You can also find our full archive of missile defense evolution at myweirdprompts.com.
We will see you in the next one. Stay safe out there.
Goodbye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts.